A long time ago, I've written this story, a long time ago, but not very far away, while I was working on a statewide campaign, a bright young woman, about the same age as you are now, Carson and your friends, a bright young woman stood in front of my desk and said, "I think you're a friend of my mother's." And as I said, this was a long time ago, and that sentence made me feel about the age I am now. But it turned out she was right. Betsy Boyd grew up in the League of Women Voters and became an activist at an obviously young age. If we had legacy memberships, she would be one. She worked for a long time as a district director for Congressman Peter DeFazio and is now the Associate Vice President for Federal Relations at the University of Oregon. And in that job, Betsy has the opportunity to work with the university's most talented faculty. And she will introduce our speaker.
Well, thank you for that, Linda, and I hope I can do half as good a job in introducing Gerri Richmond. But I will say it's always intimidating growing up in a place and then working in that same place, because you find yourself in rooms with people who knew you in high school, or your mother is here, or your mentor, or old college friends. It's a wonderful thing. So, good afternoon. Geraldine Richmond is the Presidential Chair in Science and a Professor of Chemistry at the University of Oregon. Her topic today is Women in Science Around the Globe, stories of their aspirations, successes, and challenges. As we prepare to enjoy this talk, I want to offer you 8 facts and an analogy. The facts are, Professor Richmond grew up in Kansas. The second fact is that her mother told her to get a good job, she should be good at math. She came to the University of Oregon in 1985. Even then, she was a distinguished early career faculty member, and I think it's the case that part of what brought her was a short-lived Oregon legislative program that encouraged high-impact young faculty to come to Oregon. Fourth, in 1988, she established a program called COACH, with the support from the National Science Foundation. The goal of COACH is to promote and encourage women in science. COACH is now celebrating its 20th anniversary. It has had an impact on more than 20,000 scientists, and it now has an international reach. Fifth fact is multi-parted. She is a recognized leader who serves her community, her discipline, and profession. She was a member of the State Board of Higher Education. She was an officer and a board member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, one of our nation's oldest learned societies. She is a member of the National Science Board, a presidential appointment. She is past president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. That's the world's largest multidisciplinary scientific society. It was formed in 1848. Let me say that again. A University of Oregon professor is past president of the world's largest multidisciplinary scientific society. She is a U.S. Department of State science envoy. Our sixth fact also has a couple of parts. Her scientific honors are extensive. President Obama awarded her the National Medal of Science in 2013. In 2018, her fellow scientists at the American Chemical Society recognized her with the Priestley Medal. Linus Pauling is a past recipient. Seventh, her research focus has to do with the chemistry and physics of surfaces like water and the thin layer of molecules that causes something to come together like a drop or to be dispersed, as with oil or water. That's the shakiest of the facts I'm going to give you. Her eighth fact is that her teaching interests involve science literacy for non-scientists and career development for scientists and engineers. So with those 8 facts, I want to offer an analogy. I can't help but think that Gerri's research interests are analogous to leadership and service. Her scientific interest involves understanding the structure and interface that causes something to come together or not. Put in human terms, what supports somebody's aspirations? What causes disruptions? A drop of water or a slick of oil? A scientist slowed by speed bumps or able to flourish in her career? These are the kinds of questions that occupy our guest. Please join me in welcoming a scientist, a teacher, and a mentor, Professor Richmond.
it's a pleasure to be here, and I have to say, Betsy, you reduced me to a few tears there, so now I have to compose myself and be ready to go. When I got invited to come speak with you today, I quickly looked at my calendar and was so delighted to say I was here in Eugene today, but more importantly, even if I wouldn't have been here, I would have moved things to be able to be with you, because I hope you appreciate how much I appreciate the League of Women Voters and the important role that you have historically played in our election process, and just also allowing women to network with each other on things that they really care about. And that's something that I care about too. So I'm going to go on. Betsy's given my scientific part of the talk. But let me just say a few words, because being a scientist, I've always got to say a few science things, put in a few science things there about the passion that I have particularly for water, which is why I've got this reflections up here, because my reflections are water. You know, water is incredibly special. It's sitting on your table in front of you. But, you know, what's particularly special about it, which we have to appreciate, is that it just sucks up a lot of heat. And because it sucks up a lot of heat and then will give it back to us when we want to have it back, it actually is what controls the temperature of our planet. It controls our body. It's amazing that our body can stay at this very narrow temperature range. And that is largely because we have so much water in us. We have gazillions, is that a good number? Gazillions of chemical reactions going on in our body all the time, and they are all absorbing heat and taking heat, absorbing heat and taking heat. And the fact that water is there to make sure nobody gets out of control is really important. And so, especially when we sweat, for example, it's taking heat away from our body. So there's so many other things that make water special. But there's also many, many mysteries about water. It's amazing, this little molecule that has 3 atoms in it could be so complex, and it's largely because of the things that Betsy indicated. It's that bonding with other water molecules, that makes it so special. So the interest in my laboratory, or my own interest, my fascination, is really about the surface of water. And the surface of water is also critical in our lives because it's that surface. The surface of water, the water just sticks together a lot tighter at the very, very top layer, and we really don't understand why. And so that's what we try to probe in our experiments. And why that's important to everyday life is, have you ever wondered how water gets at the top of our Douglas firs to make them green at the top? And it's all because the surface tension of water is so high. We call it the surface tension. It's basically why these molecules at the top layer stick together. And then you can also, you can see outside things are floating on it. You could take your glass of water and you could float a few things on top of it. But what is it that makes that thin sheath on the top of the water that gives it special properties? And that's what we probe in our experiments. And so in order to probe that tiny, tiny layer that's only a couple of molecules thick, we have to use some pretty fancy physics. And so what we do is we use some pretty fancy laser systems, great big laser systems that one of the systems would occupy sort of here to the wall with a lot of fancy optics, but we like toys. It's kind of like Tinker Toys or playing with toys, but on the other hand, it's a lot of electronics associated with. There's a lot of machining, there's a lot of computer programming. Nothing could make a scientist happier than to have all those things going on at once, and particularly to have your students learning in the process. So a lot of fancy laser systems, pulse laser systems, and then we also do theoretical calculations, all together with computers to try to figure out what that top layer of water looks like, but also how that top layer interacts with the world. And so if you think about the surface of water, the surface of water is really the doorway for a lot of things that happen in our environment. So we used to think that when chemistry happens in the atmosphere, whether it be pollutants reacting or ozone depletion, whatever is going on up there, we used to think it was because little molecules bounce off of each other and sometimes react to make something, just kind of bouncing around in the gaseous phase. But we now know that a lot of the chemistry that happens up in our atmosphere actually happens on the surface of water droplets on the surface of ice particulates, and that's what makes up the clouds. And so, although we know a lot about what happens when stuff bounces off each other, we know very little about what happens when things come to a water surface and then possibly react. And so in our laboratory, we study issues such as what happens in our laboratory. We study what happens when you have different atmospheric pollutants that come onto a water surface. How might they react? An example of this would be when you have dirty coal. When you burn dirty coal is made up of a lot of sulfur. And when you burn the coal, you make sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide goes up into the air, and when it gets into the clouds, which are very acidic, it produces high concentrations of acid rain. And so that's why in some parts of the country, acid rain has been very debilitating to trees and plants, and it's largely because that sulfur dioxide from dirty coal gets up into the atmosphere. And so what we do is we study the details of what happens when sulfur dioxide gets close to a water surface. Does it bounce off? Does it pull in? And how does it react? And then we also study, try to help determine what factors might go into making a dispersant could disperse an oil spill safely. Right now, when we have an oil spill, we throw chemicals on it that break up this oil spill into little tiny droplets. But the chemicals that we put on it, and then those little tiny droplets then get dispersed, microorganisms eat them, and so it at least breaks up that spill. But unfortunately, the chemicals that we use right now to disperse that oil are extraordinarily toxic. And so what we do in our studies is to study what new biologically safe dispersants might do at a water next to an oil later. And then I have to show this one with the duck. We also study a lot with soaps and surfactants, and I don't know why we have this on here, because I'm not going to end the show. Next. Oops. Ooh, I don't want to end the show. Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, and I don't do this alone. You know, I've always viewed myself as an educator first. When I was in kindergarten, I decided I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. When I was in third grade, I decided I wanted to be a third grade teacher. For those of their teachers in the audience, when I was in sixth grade, I decided I wanted to be a sixth grade teacher. When I was in eighth grade, I wanted to be an eighth grade teacher. When I was in high school, I decided I didn't want to be a teacher. And then, so any of you that have been high school teachers, you are saints. And then I got to college, and I actually realized that you could actually do teaching in college, and did some undergraduate teaching there. But these are my students in my laboratory. It's only a small number of them, but every one of them is special as a group as well as individuals, and it's such a wonderful time to work with both undergraduates and graduates to help them enter into what I think is one of the most exciting careers that they could enter into. And we have some traditions in our laboratory, which is to always dress up on Halloween, and we usually have a theme. But in this case, it was forest animals, but one of us did not get the memo that we were to dress as forest animals. We also have another tradition is whenever you do something that's really special, the way we celebrate it is that we bring in a pie and pie you without you realizing you were going to get pied. So this picture up here is just leftover pie on someone's face. It started out they started out with pieing me when I got tenure, and then as the lab evolved, you got pied when you got your PhD, when you forgot to tell people when your birthday was, when you missed coming into lab. So we've had a lot of pieings over the years, but all great students. Here's another wonderful Halloween costume and a great group that I've just had the thrill of working with here at Oregon for these 32 years. So how did I get here, and where does this issue of women in science come into this? Well, Betsy alluded a little bit to it, but I think for this group in particular, I want you to understand how important women have been in my life. So starting out, I usually show this map in countries where they have no idea where Kansas is. I started out growing up on a farm in Kansas. My father was a farmer. My mother was a beautician. She had a little beauty shop on the farm. And as we grew up, that little beauty shop moved to a little bit bigger town. It's called Lindsborg. And that little town, then, she was able to have the beauty shop. And then as her 4 daughters started to grow up, she needed to clothe them. So Dad got out of farming, and they opened a clothing store for young girls so they could buy in quantity, and then had the beauty shop in the back. And I grew up in that beauty shop. I grew up in that beauty shop, coming home from school, going to the beauty shop, being there with my mom, organizing permanent wave solutions. Remember, if some of you may remember that the hair dryers in those days looked like jet engines, right? It was just a great place, a lot of women around and very supportive. And it was in that beauty shop that my mother said to me, if you want a career, you have to be good at math. And so she would challenge me to add numbers as fast as she could when she did the books at the end of the day. So really, really important to me. And then later as the daughters got to be in college, we had to move to a college town so we could afford to go to school, and so they opened a beauty shop with clothes that carried what age clothes? College age clothes, okay? So it evolved with all of us, and we all grew up in there. Okay, so, but while I was at Kansas State, I was one of the only, there were just a few of us that were majoring in chemistry that were female, and my calculus class had about 400 students in it, and I think we had maybe a handful of us were young women. So it was a different experience than you might find in other disciplines, and a little bit better today. So after that, then, I went to get my PhD at the University of California at Berkeley, after doing some undergraduate research there the summer before. And that was really a great experience where I, again, was one of the few female graduate students in the chemistry department at the University of California at Berkeley. But since it's one of the best chemistry departments in the country, it was a great place to be able to go to get my PhD, and also to pick up my future husband there also. So after we got and my husband then hung out, well, my not then husband, but anyway, we hung out together for a long time, still do, and so we moved to the East Coast, where I originally was going to go into industry, and so I applied to all these companies, but then I didn't have very good experiences when I interviewed at these companies. 3M, for example, was considered to be, the women told me, 3M stands for 3 men. And so the experiences just told me that actually women were not welcome in industry and in my field at that time. And so at the last minute, somebody said to me, but you always wanted to be a teacher. What are you doing? And so I said, whoa, you're right. And so I threw in some applications to several small colleges, Bryn Mawr, Swarthmore, and William & Mary, and got offers from all of them. So I thought, well, maybe they know something about me that I don't know. So, but when I went to Bryn Mawr, I saw this woman's portrait over the fireplace when I went into the Alumni Center, and I said, oh my gosh, this is where I need to be. And so I started my faculty position there. My husband got a job 2 hours north at Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, and then we just commuted weekends and kept it going. But I loved my time at Bryn Mawr. Interestingly, I was the first tenure-track woman faculty member at this all-women's college in chemistry. So that was a big change too, because the students were used to having all male faculty, and so they didn't know whether I was like this mother, sister, whatever. So it was an interesting time, but I loved my time there, and I loved all the women undergraduates that I still keep in contact with today. After about 5 years, I decided that actually the research was a lot more important than I anticipated. I had built some lasers there at Bryn Mawr, got my research program going, and then decided it was time to leave. And so my husband and I then decided to go on the job market, and it just turns out that his grandparents actually lived on the North Umpqua. So Oregon, and for all the years that I knew my husband, and so my husband had this inkling that Oregon would be a great place to go, and in fact is very interdisciplinary, which we were interested in. So we turned down other offers and came to Oregon, and we haven't regretted it. So in the time that I've been at Oregon, like I said, I got this husband, if you can see these pictures, and then the babies came, and then and then the 2 sons have grown up, and now they get a little bit older and have gone on with their lives. But it's just been a wonderful place for me to both do my research, raise my family, and have really wonderful colleagues and tremendous support from the university. And once again, at the University of Oregon, I was the first female tenure-track person to be hired in the chemistry department. We're doing a bit better now. But it was, and all the time through all these years, there were struggles along the way, I have to admit that. Struggles associated with gender, but with each time you get one, you move beyond it and try to make yourself stronger for it. So after moving to Oregon, then I took on a lot of different roles and responsibilities outside of the university. The State Board of Higher Education was one, as well as a lot of different activities in Washington, D.C., which gave me a considerable amount of visibility, and also allowed me to network with a lot of different women scientists around the country, because many women are very isolated, and so being able to connect with them was really important. So in these different forays that I went into, I was hearing a lot of stories from the women scientists. This was back in the 90s. And so I started asking a lot of women about their careers and the challenges that they're seeing in their careers. And these are some of the points that they made. I've run into some really painful run-ins with other faculty members, and I don't think this job is worth it. These are mostly women faculty. I had a large fraction of my laboratory space taken away without warning and given to a new hire, and I have a very active research program. Woman faculty member at the University of California at Berkeley. I like to know how to gain more respect from my students, so there's student issues that can happen too. I was passed over for a promotion position in my department. It was given to a younger male faculty member. And finally, the one that really broke the camel's back, I'm not very happy in this position, and it's killing my love of science. So to think that you've entered into this field and you love it so much, and yet these barriers come in the way that either slow you down or stop you from making any progress, are ones that really hit me very hard. And that was the reason for starting the organization we call COACH, which originally started as, had the acronym COACH, but the name was the Committee on the Advancement of Chemists, which is why it has the little H on the end of it. And so what we did, I got a group of about 10 or 11 women chemists, senior chemists from around the country, and what we did was to sit around, we got some funding from the Dreyfus Foundation, and what we did then was talk about what the status of women in chemistry was in our fields, and realized that actually in our mid-careers, we were finding that women were being passed over for the most prestigious prizes, the invited lectureships, the distinguished professorships, and we wanted to do something about that for the community. And so that's why we started COACH, and with that, we developed a series of workshops on skills that we think women really need. Well, men and women in science actually need it, but the women, because they tend to not be mentored very much or very well, we were going to be their mentors for them. And so that's what we've been doing the last 20 years, is providing these workshops to women scientists, first in the United States and then around the world. And so the key elements of our COACH program, as you can see here, we're really grassroots, it's bottom up. And what we do is take harness the energy and the creativity of women scientists around the United States to help other women scientists. And these women scientists come from a lot of different areas, so I can draw on them when I go work on a project in Africa or Southeast Asia, to have them come over as leaders, as women, to come over and leaders and not just interact with women, but also men. And it's also data-driven. We have a social science research team that does a lot of our surveys and studies the impact of what we do in all of our programs. So the kind of workshops that we do, there are usually a few hours, and leaders in the scientific enterprise, the skills that you need in order to be a leader, whether that be lead your research group or be better teachers. The career launch tips and tactics is largely for undergraduates and graduate students, men and women, as well as postdocs. Effective communication and negotiation. This is the favorite one. I give some of these. I give most all of these, but I don't have a lot of time to give them, so we have other teams of women that give them. But my favorite to give is the negotiation workshop, because it's not just about how to get a better salary, it's how to work with difficult people in a manner that takes you forward. And so this is the one that I really enjoy. Developing a balanced career portfolio, high risk, low risk, things that make you happy, things that follow your values. Career launch and acceleration is, again for our younger women scientists. Powerful postdocs, successful mentorship, as well as entrepreneurship. So when what I do is when somebody comes to us and says, we'd love to have you do this workshop with us, then I run around and write grants and beg, borrow, and steal money wherever I can find it, and then allows good enough money for us to go and give these workshops wherever we possibly can. So it's a labor of love, because when you see the impact of what we've done, it's astounding. Especially when you talk to women that did the programs 15 years ago and are now department heads and provosts and deans at their universities. And so our impact, you can see here, big impact. 94% say what they learned in their workshops advanced their careers. 83% said that what they learned lowered their stress level. That's my favorite, because we can all need ways to figure out how to lower our stress. Many have attained faculty positions, and 92% have taken the skills to mentor other women, so it continues to give. So as we've gone through this process, and we'll actually have another of our many, it'll be our 40th Coach Advisory Board meeting next week, and with my group that's now bigger than 12, it's now 25, and it's women from all different disciplines. And so what we decided as an advisory board about 5 years ago, we were asked if we could do these workshops in different countries, in other countries, because women scientists struggle in those countries also. And so we decided that our biggest impact could be actually in developing countries, because many of the developed countries already have enough resources to be able to do the kind of surveys that we do, also do the kind of training. That doesn't mean we don't go work in Germany or France or Japan or China, but what we really have focused on then is working in developing countries through our Coach International program. And so again, if there's interest from a particular country, the first thing that we do is we go in, I usually go in, maybe with somebody else, and on the coach board, and we ask them what they need, what they want, what are cultural issues that are particularly problematic for women scientists in their countries, and then we figure out a way at which I can come back or I can bring a team with me to do workshops, these coach workshops in those countries on the issues that they find to be most important. And so you can see, I don't quite have all the countries dotted on here because this is a little bit of an old map, but you can at least see we've been to a lot of countries in Africa. We've also been to a lot of countries in South America too. And then just this spring, I did some trips to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan to do some activities there also. But it's just been a tremendous experience, because the training is one thing, but the real value is to find out the aspirations of these women scientists, the challenges that they face, so you can get kind of a global picture, particularly in the developing world, of the need for scientists in general, but also women scientists. And in most countries, women scientists are in a huge disadvantage relative to their male colleagues, except for a few. So example, the countries that have the highest number of women in their national academies of sciences, let me see if you can first guess. Any ideas? Who has the highest? So the National Academy of Sciences is considered to be the primo organization to belong to in the country, in your country, and you get elected by your fellow members. And the United States, our percentages of women in National Academy, I think, is something around 20%, 22%. So, but what countries do you think have more? Iran, Cuba. And one of the reasons I was told is because you make more money as a cab driver than you make doing science. So the men go drive cabs and the women do the science. But also there's more of, in some of these countries, there's just more of an egalitarian view. India is really a good example of a country where people really do believe that men and women are equally capable of doing science. So there's a real positive side to that too. But on the other hand, there are other issues that come in. So I'm going to just take the liberty of showing you a few pictures of these wonderful women and a little bit of the stories, if this will advance forward. Okay, India. The real struggles for women in those countries is that they generally have to not just feed their family, their husband and their children, but every night they must go home and feed their mother-in-laws and father-in-laws and the extended family. That's the role of the daughter-in-law. And doing that, you don't do that with a microwave. You usually spend 3 or 4 hours a night cooking for the extended family. So doing that while you also try to keep your job going is incredibly challenging. Vietnam. Oh my gosh, Vietnam's got to be these days one of my favorite countries, and I think it's because of all the energy that's there to be able to make a difference in their countries. and to see the thaw that has happened between the U.S. and Vietnam as we've celebrated our 22nd year of reunification. I've spent a lot of time in this region of the world because of my science envoyship to the Lower Mekong River countries, where I've been working with connecting men and women scientists in those countries with scientists in the U.S. And so this in particular is young women that were at our workshop that we did having to do with Intel supporting it to get more women in IT. Oops, there's my guys. Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, just an exciting place too. A lot of entrepreneurial young women, not very many, more in the senior levels. And the senior level women struggle to get into any type of leadership positions. In the Mekong River region of the Thailand, Vietnam, Burma, who am I forgetting? Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, Burma, Cambodia, and Laos. In these countries, a lot of times the government completely controls where science goes and who gets to be chosen as their science leaders, and in most cases they don't choose women. So these young women have decided to go into, in this case, another sponsorship by Intel. Now Oman, which is going to come up. Oman is an interesting country. And as you see here, I've got a few guys that get involved with our projects too. In fact, in many of these countries, both men and women come to our workshops to get training. And Oman is an interesting country. It's incredibly peaceful. It's a beautiful country that sits on the end of the Saudi Peninsula, right next to Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And the most amazing thing about Oman is how peaceful it is, and for this very wild part of the world and crazy part of the world. But in Oman, what they do for their universities is you can only get into a university if you have passed certain exams and passed certain tests. And so you have to have high credentials once you graduate from high school. And so that means that only the smartest go to their universities, which are supported by the government. That means that 80% of the students are women. And so when I first went to a campus in Oman, I thought it was at a women's college. And they said, no, this is our best university in the country. It's just that our students are all women. Because the women are really driven and they're really motivated, and the guys just basically sit around and wait to get a job. They don't feel like they have to get educated, so they wait for a government job. But the difficulty the country is having, as well as the women, is that when they graduate from college, then they have the social norms to stop and have children and get out of the workforce and then come back into the workforce maybe 10 years later, which then kind of takes them out of the scientific expertise that they really need. So the government is really serious about trying to figure out how women can have both children and a career, because otherwise they're pumping all of this money into the women to get a good education, and then they don't go into the workforce. So they're really struggling with how they can possibly develop programs that allow women to do both. And, a guiding light in all of this is that these days in most countries, for any couple, you need to have employment of two people in the family to make a living. And so I think that's going to make a big difference in Oman too, because the younger people that I talk to, especially the women, say that they know they have to work because otherwise they financially can't survive in this very beautiful country. And then Indonesia, I've done a lot of work in Indonesia helping to train young students, both men and women, in how to publish, write proposals, negotiate, communicate their science, and so forth. And again, for women, there aren't many women in leadership roles, but there are a lot of really excited young women about doing science if they can just keep things going to the level that they can then be successful in their careers. But in all of these countries, the real difficulty is if they go out of the country to get their education, coming back is really hard, because they go abroad to do an education where there's a lot of beautiful equipment, big laser systems, nice equipment, computers, and they come home, and in most cases, except for the more wealthy ones, there's just nothing left for them to come back to do science. So figuring out how to keep them going in their science and come home is a challenge. And this is these three beautiful young women are star entrepreneurs in Burma or Myanmar. Wonderful, wonderful women that I had the opportunity to meet and talk with. And in Cambodia, how privileged for me to be able to meet with all these women, but also go into rural areas of Cambodia to the schools that USAID supports that gives these young women in this remote, poorest area of Cambodia little tablets in their library that they can work from. And Laos, Madagascar, I could tell you many, many more stories, but they're all very similar to before. Doing science in those countries is very difficult, so for us to be able to go in and develop partnerships between scientists in the U.S. and scientists in those countries is something that's really my passion in any way that we can. And that's why we have projects that we're launching in particularly the lower Mekong River countries to bring neuroscientists and nutritional scientists from the U.S. over to that region to help with their childhood stunting problem. For those of you that may not know anything about childhood stunting, that is that you don't have the nutritional needs in the first 1,000 days of your life in order to reach a normal size. So that means by the age of 2, if someone has not had the proper nutrition or has not had clean water or appropriate hygiene, they have reached maybe 50% of the normal height, and they will never overcome that disadvantage, ever. So they will be small the rest of their lives. They will have diseases, be more prone to diseases the rest of their life, and their brain will not have developed because those first 1,000 days are the most important in brain development. So helping nutritionists, taking some neuroscientists over there to help nutritionists there understand it's not just the body, the physical stature, but it's also the brain and what kinds of vitamins and nutritions need to be given to those children at the early age. And the practices need to be thrown, cultural practices that need to be thrown out in order to have children that are strong and be able to cope in the world ahead. And then we have another project in Africa, which is to network women scientists together in Africa so that they can have some say in policy issues and in their countries. In Africa, women do most of the work with water. They're the ones that are in there managing water resources at the low level. They're the ones that go and get the water early in the morning to bring home to their families. They're the ones that worry about whether their children will have water, and yet they have very little say into where the next dam is going to be built by China or what's going to happen with any kind of resources in there having to do with agriculture in their country. So trying to network women scientists working in water together is another passion of mine that we continue to work on. Oops. And Tunisia, I've worn my Tunisian necklace that they gave me just to remember them. In Tunisia, women have had rights longer than we have in the United States. And in fact, in Tunisia, the guys have to be really careful because if a woman decides to divorce you, she gets everything. Everything. Tunisia is a wonderful country, and then for reasons other than that, so I have to say, let me just add this little sidebar. I didn't finish the statement why my mother told me to be good at math. My mother told me to be good at math because someday I may not have a husband to support me. He may die or run off with some other lady, and I needed to have a career of my own, just in case. But she also went through World War II, so she saw a lot of husbands die then too. But anyway, sorry, that ties to my Tunisia story. And then finally, this is a group of women scientists that we've pulled together from all over the continent. This is one of our Women in Water workshops, just a wonderful group of women. This was supported by U.S. State Department, this particular workshop. And Elsevier is going to provide us funding in the next 3 years for doing workshops like this in Ghana, Ethiopia, and Botswana. How can I not leave Cameroon? My very first workshops I did in Cameroon, just a wonderful group of women, but very disadvantaged. In many of these countries, HIV/AIDS is a huge problem, diabetes is a huge problem, and the women that we work with in Cameroon are really dedicated to trying to solve some of these problems. Okay, so what we've learned, well, to summarize some of this, that women can benefit from dialogue and networking with each other, women scientists. I think that's the case more with other women too. But especially training in these skills that we provide. My clicker needs to. And leadership techniques that work for women. In many of the countries, it's publishing and proposal writing so you can get the resources that you need in order to do your science. And I'm standing here clicking. Self-promotion and self-marketing, enough confidence to be able to go out there and say, I'm really good at this. And we work a lot on trying to help women build their confidence up so they can go out and do things. And then also preparation for career stages. These are just really important skills that oftentimes women don't get the mentoring to be able to advance. And then for our, what we've learned in terms of our international work, in most countries in Africa, a PhD means giving up your family. In many of the countries in Africa, if a woman wants to go out of the country to get a PhD, they don't have graduate funding to do that, so they have to go and live under very difficult situations to get a PhD. And then when they and they have to leave their families behind, and what usually happens, particularly in countries like Mozambique, is the husband divorces the wife because she's left and takes the children. And so the women give up a lot to be able to advance in their careers. And very few achieve leadership roles in their government or their institution, and family demands are really high, as I indicated. You know, being able to put all of this in just a few minutes, my brain is just going through all the pictures of these women and their stories, but I tell you, nothing could be more rewarding to be with them, to see of any way that I can learn from them and that I can help them. And provide this international lifeline that hopefully can be helpful. So why do we need scientists, women scientists anyway? I mean, aren't we doing just fine? Well, we know that the best science is done when you have diversity in the room, when you have diverse opinions, when you have diverse backgrounds. The data shows that. The most successful companies are ones that have more women on their boards, more women in leadership roles. We know that, and we have failures. Remember? The first seat belts that were, the first airbags that were created, right? Killed women and children, designed by men only, right? First heart transplant, those hearts were made for men's bodies, not for women's bodies. Didn't work for women. Voice recognition systems, recognize male voices, not women. So when your husband tells you that you're a bad driver, you can just say it's the voice recognition system in the car that recognizes your voice and not mine. So there's a lot of things. You have lots of examples of where when you only have a single viewpoint or a single kind of training in the room, you just don't get the robust discoveries, innovation that you need. So I'll leave you with that thought and to say thank you very much for letting me be here with you today and to share my thoughts with you. And I congratulate all of you and thank all of you for the work that you do. Oh, I'd be happy to answer any questions if people want to ask questions. That was rapid fire.
So the question was, who were the people?
Huh?
Who are the people? Are these students?
No. This is just from some of our coach materials, people that we've met.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Bloor, and I write a series called Women Breaking Barriers about female executives in traditionally male-dominated occupations. And I'm curious, for female scientists around the world, what are the features that either countries or institutions have in common that really promotes more representation of women?
You mean
so in Iran, for example, you brought that up as an example of a country. Is there something particular about why so many more female scientists are succeeding there as opposed to places like the U.S. or others?
Yeah, so, I was a bit flippant about the fact that men drive taxis, but in actual fact, in those very successful countries, it hasn't been for the government promoting it. It's largely been because of economic factors, but also sort of more of a communist sort of oriented attitude too, where everyone is equally capable of succeeding. It's been very interesting working in China because when China first came out, and then they realized that they needed to get more women scientists there, and everybody was supposed to be equal, and so more women scientists appeared on the scene, and trying to promote more young women coming up and that everyone was equal. But in recent years, as they've adopted more of the developed country model, there's the same kind of discrimination against the women that you see in most all of the other developed countries. I don't really know any country that's doing all that well. I think the U.S. is probably, I know that the U.S. is ahead of most countries, better than Scandinavian countries, better than most European countries. The worst countries are probably Japan, Korea. They're really the worst. And it's very difficult for me to work in those countries simply because, for various reasons. So I'm not sure that I can say that any country is doing a great job. But I think, if anything, companies are doing a better job at it. You know, in laboratories, you can be very isolated. You can have a boss that's more isolated, doesn't really have to report to someone, unless you're in a company, and then the company sets the real standards for what behavior you need and your goals and so forth. And so I think in a lot of our laboratories, academic, but also our government laboratories, there's this kind of isolation that leads to behavior that doesn't get called down on. So that's more probably than you needed to know, but that's to respond to your question.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm
Hi,
a
Emily.
graduate student at University of Oregon
Ah, good. In what field?
in neuroscience.
Oh, great, great.
Thank you for coming today to share your story and all of your work. My question is, throughout all of your work helping women in science, what have been the biggest challenges to pushing your initiatives forward?
Well, the initial challenges, thanks for asking that question. The initial challenges when I started Coach was that I was told that I should, if I really wanted to succeed in my scientific career, I should not dilly-dally around with women's issues or have children, because it distracts from science, and the best scientists are ones that do it 24/7. And so that was really, keeping that going with that attitude pervasive even today in science has been a challenge, not just for me, but to convince other women that it's okay to do that. And so one of the most gratifying things that I find today is when younger women come up and they say, "Oh, thank heavens you've been able to do both of those, because I don't just want to do my scientific research, I want to do more than that." And so showing them that, at least for me, it's been possible to do that. That's been a big challenge. It's been a big challenge.
My name is Beth Weldy, and I'm curious to know what you do about the language barrier, how you find interpreters. Are they women? And how do you know what you're saying is what they're saying?
Good question. So what we do, thanks for asking that question too. So what I do is I usually find someone that's from a woman scientist here in the U.S. that's from that country that speaks that language. So whether it be in India or, a lot of the Francophile countries in Africa, you just need to find someone that comes with me to do French. And then but some countries where I can't find someone that speaks the language, then I either hire a woman interpreter to work with me and we go through things beforehand. Or I find a woman scientist in the country that we resonate really well, and then she does the workshops with me. Cameroon, that's worked beautifully. They actually have a Coach Cameroon chapter. And so it's a matter of recruiting people to come with me either from the U.S. or in those countries to be able to do the translation. The only time I had to have a male translator was in Mozambique. And in that country, because they have more of the Portuguese language I can't remember which, that's more like the Brazilian. And so that was a bit of a challenge. But he was great. He was great. And they laughed when I thought I was telling a joke, and he told a joke, they laughed. So I guess that meant something was going right. Or he told them something more bizarre than what I said.
Hi, my name's Avi Naiman, and if you'll allow a question from a double Xer.
Certainly.
You were very fortunate to have such an astute mother. One of my goals in life is to eradicate the phrase, "I don't do math." Yeah. And my question is targeted towards the early development years, the sort of middle school, high school, where so many girls, but even a lot of our boys, are just so uncomfortable with math. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're teaching 50-year-old math. We're not teaching math for the modern world. We're not teaching problem solving and how math is a tool to everything that you're going to want to do with an education. And so my question for you is, how are you being able to address anything more on the educational front that we need to revise our math education to be more integrated into our curriculum, more developing for what you're going to need in college and what industry needs and what people need in the world?
Well, thanks for that question too, because that's really, really important. And so where I work in that area is by serving on the National Science Board. We oversee the National Science Foundation that funds science education programs all over the country. And so there are big changes afoot with regards to being able to understand how students learn in new environments and also different socioeconomic backgrounds, different motivational levels, and we're really, I think there's a keen interest in seeing how we can revise the curriculum, both math as well as science, in a way that really targets, that's kind of fine-tuned to the group that's there, because it's very much more diverse than it ever was than when I went through school. You know, the message that I give to parents is that dads are really important, but mothers are even more important in convincing your children to do math, particularly your daughters to do math. Because when the mother says, I'm not very good at math, it sends a huge message to the daughter that you don't need to be good in math. And even as a mother, if you're not good at math, say you'll learn with them. You know, it'd be great to learn algebra with you. Let's hang together and do it. Or get someone else to help them. You know, I have a story that reduces me to tears, but I'm going to try to get through it. So I had all the social pressures going through middle school and high school. I was a cheerleader for 5 years, right? So I was not in the books all through high school and junior high. And when I was in junior high, and all the insecurities that you have, and geometry, my geometry teacher called me up on the board to do a geometry proof. And I got up on the board and I did that proof. And when I finished, she said to me, "Wow, that was amazing. That was very creative, and it's right." And at that time, I had just a few days before that, left the counselor's office. You know, you take those tests to figure out what you're good at. And that counselor said, "You're really fast at math, you're really good at it, and you're really fast. So you'll be a great secretary." So I enrolled in shorthand, bookkeeping, typing. And my mother supported it because of the fact that she was afraid I wouldn't make it through college without having to stop and get a job, so that would be backup skills. But when that geometry teacher said to me, "You're very creative and you're very good in math," I remember it today. I don't remember anything else about middle school. But then I went into high school and I had all the social pressures. I wore the hot pants. Remember hot pants and boots? Oh, God. Did the cheerleader thing. Did fine in school. And that same math teacher ended up being the calculus teacher in high school, which I did not enroll in. And he came up to me my senior year and he said, "Why are you wasting your talents?" When I entered college, I enrolled as a math major, right? So for me, I told you I'd get emotional. For me, a teacher like that saved me. And then math turned into chemistry, almost turned into physics, almost turned into engineering. But that really saved me. So anyway, thanks for letting me share that.
Hi, Gerri. Thank you so much. Great talk. My name is Michelle. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Oregon. And
in what field?
Molecular biology.
Oh, good. Good.
So I was wondering if you had any advice about how best to communicate to our male colleagues that gender equality is important, and also to inspire them to be our allies towards that goal.
That's another good question. You know, I think increasingly we have guys that sort of get it. But, you know, graduate school is a very competitive situation. You're competing with everybody, right? You're going to have to get a job with somebody that's sharing your lab. You know, you're going to have to get a job, and so is the person next to you, and so forth. So it's a very competitive situation. And so I think just as best, you know, trying to find, you know, calling down guys because they do something wrong isn't necessarily motivating them to be better for you to do that. But if you have the other guys that play that role, that's even more important. And I think what's also critically important is that the research advisor sets the tone. The research advisor says, that's unacceptable behavior, this is acceptable behavior, and calls, you know, gives the women, the young girls, the women, as good a research projects, as many publications as the guys. But it's also the women also have to step up and say, I deserve that too. You have to have the confidence to be able to say, I deserve that, I'm going to go after it too. Because oftentimes we shy away from standing up for ourselves. And so it's really, you got to take care of yourself, but you need to find allies too. That's a great question.
Hi, I'm Casey Jans, and I am also a U of O graduate many years ago, but so I would like to thank you for your wonderful talk about and sharing all of your experiences and what you're doing actively now. And I also want to say how wonderful it is to have a great number of young women, I don't know, maybe young men too, but the young women who are here today that are in the field of science. And I want to encourage those people to become a part of this group. And because what we do here is supportive of what you do. And so anyway, thank you to you and to also the guests that we have here today. And I wanted to encourage them to become part of the League of Women Voters.
I want to emphasize that because as young women, you never know when you're going to need somebody. You need broad networks, and you also need a diverse portfolio, career portfolio. You need to be doing your science, but you also need to be doing things like this, because when the science isn't working, and sometimes it doesn't work, you need to have other things that you feel that you can go to and people you can go to. And the diversity of experiences and age groups is really important. So I absolutely second that.
Hi. Thanks for coming today. I'm Ardine Maxey, and unfortunately, I think a lot of women my age have a story like this. When I was a junior in high school, I took mechanical drawing. My teacher would not answer my questions, would not look at me. I was the only girl in the class. If it had not been for Tony Shower, the boy that sat in front of me, I would not have been able to get through the book. I got a passing grade, and I can still remember this man turning his back on me, refusing to speak to me. But the horrible part of the story is it never occurred to me to complain. I took it as the norm. Yeah. And I just am so proud of women between then and now that stopped and thought, I don't think this is right. We were so accustomed to be treated like that, we thought it was the norm, and it's not. Thank you.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of women in science who believe it's the norm. And we have to give them voice. We have to give them voice.
Sandra Bishop, League of Women Voters member. Since the 70s, I see some of my old mentors here and people I've known forever. I would not have had the career I had or built a business if I hadn't first become a League member. I think I lived my life backwards. Some people wait until they're retired to join. I was very lucky. I joined in my 20s. My question to you is, you've had an incredibly successful career, and I can't imagine how busy you were with career and family and children. What made you want to serve in public positions like the governing board of the universities?
Well, because I'm just very curious. I guess that's it. I love meeting people. I love seeing how organizations work. I like seeing if any way that I can help. But I just get energized by meeting new people and new groups and learning how they work and then seeing if I can provide some kind of a leadership role. You will notice in all of the leadership roles I've had, I've never been a department head. I've never been, this sort of administrative position here at the University of Oregon. And because I get all my enjoyment really from diversity of different leadership positions that I've held. How I've done it is, first of all, I'm fortunate to have a tremendous amount of energy, in addition to curiosity, but I also have just an incredibly supportive husband, who doesn't mind when I paint the walls in the house a different color than he might not like, or change the pictures on the wall, but also that, he's just been a tremendous partner. He's a physicist, so, an extraordinary physicist, who now works down at Berkeley during the week, flies home on weekends, so we're bouncing around a lot, but after the kids went off to college. But he's just been a tremendous supporter through all these years. Did all the grocery shopping, all the cooking. I did the laundry and vacuuming and so forth, and then hired a housekeeper to do it instead. And but he's been tremendously important in all of this too. I can't say enough.
So thank you. We had an unsolicited join the League of Women Voters, and credit to our partners. And they're not always spouses, but having someone who supports you like that is really important. So help me thank Professor Richmond. And
thank you. Oh, good.
So
let me say thank you, because I don't have to put this in a suitcase. I can put this in my car and take it back.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. So just remember, there's a basket on the door by the door when you leave that you can throw your name tags in. I'd like to also thank the Garden Club for bringing flowers for the table today. And I'd like to thank Jim Dotson, who reminded me that he was here to help, and is just an enormous help to us during these programs. And our speaker next month is Patty Perlow, the District Attorney for Lane County. So see you next month. Oh, and you may take the flowers with you.
Great,
okay, thank you. And thank you, especially to the young women who are here. Thank you.
Very creative, and it's right. And at that time, I had a few days before that, left the counselor's office. You take those tests to figure out what you're good at. And that counselor said, you're really fast at math, you're really good at it, and you're really fast. So you'll be a great secretary. So I enrolled in shorthand, bookkeeping, typing. And my mother supported it because of the fact that she was afraid I wouldn't make it through college without having to stop and get a job, so that would be backup skills. But when that geometry teacher said to me, you're very creative and you're very good in math, I remember it today. I don't remember anything else about middle school. But then I went into high school and I had all the social pressures. I wore the hot pants. Remember hot pants and boots? Oh, God. Did the cheerleader thing. Did fine in school. And that same math teacher ended up being the calculus teacher in high school, which I did not enroll in. And he came up to me my senior year and he said, why are you wasting your talents? When I entered college, I enrolled as a math major, right? So for me, I told you I'd get emotional. For me, a teacher like that saved me. And then math turned into chemistry, almost turned into physics, almost turned into engineering. But that really saved me. So anyway, thanks for letting me share that.
Hi, Gerri. Thank you so much. Great talk. My name is Michelle. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Oregon. And
in what field?
Molecular biology.
Oh, good. Good.
So I was wondering if you had any advice about how best to communicate to our male colleagues that gender equality is important, and also to inspire them to be our allies towards that goal.
That's another good question. I think increasingly we have guys that sort of get it. But graduate school is a very competitive situation. You're competing with everybody, right? You're going to have to get a job with somebody that's sharing your you're going to have to get a job, and so is the person next to you, and so forth. So it's a very competitive situation. And so I think just as best, trying to find, calling down guys because they do something wrong isn't necessarily motivating them to be better. For you to do that, but if you have the other guys that play that role, that's even more important. And I think what's also critically important is that the research advisor sets the tone. The research advisor says that's unacceptable behavior, this is acceptable behavior, and calls, gives the women, the young girls, the women, as good a research projects, as many publications as the guys. But it's also the women also have to step up and say, I deserve that too. You have to have the confidence to be able to say, I deserve that, I'm going to go after it too, because oftentimes we shy away from standing up for ourselves. And so it's really, got to take care of yourself, but you need to find allies too. Those are great questions.
Hi, I'm Casey Jans, and I am also a U of O graduate many years ago, but so I would like to thank you for your wonderful talk about and sharing all of your experiences and what you're doing actively now.
Oh, thanks.
And I also want to say how wonderful it is to have a great number of young women, I don't know, maybe young men too, but the young women who are here today that are in the field of science. Mm-hmm. And I want to encourage those people to become a part of this group. Yeah. Because what we do here is supportive of what you do. And so anyway, thank you to you and to also the guests that we have here today. And I wanted to encourage them to become part of the League of Women Voters.
I want to emphasize that because as young women, you never know when you're going to need somebody. You need broad networks, and you also need a diverse portfolio, career portfolio. You need to be doing your science, but you also need to be doing things like this, because when the science isn't working, and sometimes it doesn't work, you need to have other things that you feel that you can go to and people you can go to. And the diversity of experiences and age groups is really important. So I absolutely second that.
Hi. Thanks for coming today. I'm Ardine Maxey, and unfortunately, I think a lot of women my age have a story like this. Mm-hmm. When I was a junior in high school, I took mechanical drawing. My teacher would not answer my questions, would not look at me. I was the only girl in the class. If it had not been for Tony Shower, the boy that sat in front of me, I would not have been able to get through the book. I got a passing grade, and I can still remember this man turning his back on me, refusing to speak to me. But the horrible part of the story is it never occurred to me to complain. I took it as the norm. Yeah. And I just am so proud of women between then and now that stopped and thought, I don't think this is right. We were so accustomed to be treated like that, we thought it was the norm, and it's not. Thank you.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of women in science who believe it's the norm, and we have to give them voice. We have to give them voice.
Sandra Bishop, League of Women Voters member. Since the 70s, I see some of my old mentors here and people I've known forever. I would not have had the career I had or built a business if I hadn't first become a League member. I think I lived my life backwards. Some people wait until they're retired to join. I was very lucky. I joined in my 20s. My question to you is, you've had an incredibly successful career, and I can't imagine how busy you were with career and family and children. What made you want to serve in public positions like the governing board of the universities?
Well, because I'm just very curious. I guess that's it. I love meeting people. I love seeing how organizations work. I like seeing if any way that I can help. But I just get energized by meeting new people and new groups and learning how they work and then seeing if I can provide some kind of a leadership role. You will notice in all of the leadership roles I've had, I've never been a department head. I've never been, this sort of administrative position here at the University of Oregon. And because I get all my enjoyment really from from diversity of different leadership positions that I've held. How I've done it is, first of all, I'm fortunate to have a tremendous amount of energy, in addition to curiosity, but I also have just an incredibly supportive husband, who doesn't mind when I paint the walls in the house a different color than he might not like, or change the pictures on the wall, but also that, he's just been a tremendous partner. He's a physicist, so, an extraordinary physicist, who now works down at Berkeley during the week, flies home on weekends, so we're bouncing around a lot. But after the kids went off to college, but he's just been a tremendous supporter through all these years. Did all the grocery shopping, all the cooking. I did the laundry and vacuuming and so forth, and then hired a housekeeper to do it instead. And but he's been tremendously important in all of this too. I can't say enough.
So thank you. We had an unsolicited join the League of Women Voters, and credit to our partners. And they're not always spouses, but having someone who supports you like that is really important. So help me thank Professor Richmond. And
thank you. Oh, good.
So,
let me say thank you, because I don't have to put this in a suitcase. I can put this in my car and take it back.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. So just remember, there's a basket on the door by the door when you leave that you can throw your name tags in. I'd like to also thank the Garden Club for bringing flowers for the table today. And I'd like to thank Jim Dotson, who reminded me that he was here to help, and is just an enormous help to us during these programs. And our speaker next month is Patty Perlow, the District Attorney for Lane County. So see you next month. Oh, and you may take the flowers with you.
Great,
okay,
thank you.
And thank you, especially to the young women who are here. Thank you.